All right. So today is the architecture and structural engineering overview. We've also got a little bit of interior design and talking a little bit about virtual design and construction as well. So let's go to the next slide that's got our intros. Okay, so there's a whole team who's going to present different areas of expertise. So I'm Sarah Jacobson. I'm an architect at a design build firm with LJC and Clayco. Jack's going to help me present the architecture section, and then everyone else will kind of introduce themselves as they get to their section, but just so you see all the names of who's going to go through here. So let's hop into architecture. We've got a lot to get through, so I want to go through it quickly. So starting just kind of describing, what is architecture? Both the word that describes, an actual kind of thing. So a physical structure or a space. These are all architecture that might be familiar to you guys. So there's downtown Los Angeles and all the buildings that are there. And architecture could really refer to both the buildings and all the kind of spaces in between them. So really a whole city. The next, an individual house. And so this is a pretty famous house. It's a case study house in Los Angeles that was part of a program in mid-century. But there are lots of different individual houses, all different kinds of styles. Or it can be these kind of like a style or a really big kind of famous place. So something is relatively newly constructed in Los Angeles and actually just opened up after COVID is the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. So all architecture can be all different kinds of styles and all different kinds of more basic buildings, even things we're not showing here, like a McDonald's or a Target or your dentist's office. So really any kind of space that's built in the built environment is architecture. Let's hop to the next slide. And then, the people who build these or design these are architects. And what do they actually do? I've seen it described as both the art and science, or the art or practice of designing buildings and structures. And something that's important to understand is that architecture happens at a bunch of different scales, both at the urban scale of the city, and even in some kind of utopia visions, probably at the scale of a country. The scale of a building, and buildings can range in all sizes, from a tiny little house up to something like the SoFi Stadium, which is a new piece of architecture in Los Angeles. And architecture also goes on to a much smaller scale, to the scale of a room, and really even honestly beyond the scale of a room to much smaller things like, there's some architects who design furniture or a light fixture or something really, really small that just goes into that room. Let's hop to the next one. And then, an idea of how architects work. I think there's probably an idea that architects are sitting at their desk and they're drawing all the time. And architects used to draw a lot more physically with their hands, but we work a whole bunch of different ways. So we do sketch really quickly by hand to start with. I think there's all other physical studies though. We do mock-ups, material studies, models. I think there's the part about, we do work on computers. Most of the drawing that any architect is going to be doing now is going to be happening on a computer using Revit or Rhino or SketchUp, other tools like that. And then once the project is off the drawing table and starts to get built, the project site visits, design definitely continues through the construction process. But the one slide that I wanted to leave on here, I think that leave for the end, even though it sort of starts at the very beginning of the process, is the collaboration. I think that's something important. I think there's a vision that architects are just go off and they work on their own and develop this building, but that's not the case. So we're always collaborating. So it's collaborating with other architects. It's definitely a team sport, but you're also going to be consulting with like your structural engineers, your interior designers, landscape architects, as well as the construction team and the client, everyone else. So architecture is definitely, you're collaborating all the time and working with a whole bunch of different people to get a project done. And then the other piece of getting that kind of training, architects happen at all different scales. So there's some people, I personally am working on designing buildings, but I worked in construction management for a while. There's furniture design, product design, there's all other kinds of, we've got interior design, some other alternative paths. So you can still be an architect and not necessarily be doing the traditional practice of architecture. I'm going to hand it over to Jack now.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Jack Bien, and I am also a licensed architect. I am originally from Canada and been working in Los Angeles for last 5 years or so. And what classes I should take to prepare for school, for architecture school. I think in high school, I remember science and math were definitely the very important classes. Physics and calculus. Take the highest level of math classes if you can. Technology was important. It introduced me about 3D modeling, AutoCAD, when I was in school, and also using our hands and making models, using power tools and making small models. That was really really fun to do. And also art class. Art class is fun and it really allows you to express yourself. Try to take as much as art classes as possible, because if you go to the next slide, please. Portfolio is often a requirement for an architecture education. The content of your portfolio really depends on you, what you're really good at and what you want to express. It's not limited to any, the images you see on the screen right now are paintings, sketches. There's some sculpture on the right bottom corner, but you can also include photography, things you have built. It's good to show process of what you make. It shows you how you think, what sort of type of person you are, and what kind of visual stuff interests you. So I think the portfolio does take a lot of time. So there's a lot of examples and a lot of opportunities to craft that piece of work. Yep, next slide. Licensed architect is a process that requires many years. First one is education, getting an architect degree in undergrad or graduate school. That usually takes anywhere from 5 to 8 years. Experience, after you finish your education, you work under the supervision of a licensed architect and gather different experience and hours in different areas. That takes anywhere, it really depends what kind of work you do, but that usually takes about 3 years or more. And during that, you can also get study and pass your exams. There are multiple exams. Right now, there are 6 exams for national and 1 supplemental in California. Licensure is specific to the state, and every state has a little bit of a different requirement. California requires you to do an extra exam in addition to the 6 architecture exams you need to do. So after completion of all those 3 major things, you become a licensed architect. Next.
Thanks, Jack. So I'm actually a licensed architect, but you actually need a license in architecture to do interior architecture. So I currently do both. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and then what the difference is between interior architecture and interior design. Can everyone hear me okay? That's fine. Okay. So on the right, you can see the circle that says architect, and in the middle, the circle that says interior architect and designer. So as Jack and Sarah pointed out, architects can do furniture, but if you go over to the left, usually if you're getting hired from a firm, especially a medium-sized to large firm, only the interior designer would be working on furniture, upholstery, decor, styling, custom millwork, and cosmetic renovations. If you're working at a really small kind of design boutique firm, or you have your own firm, you could be doing a full building and furniture perhaps. Or you could, switch careers, do education in architecture, and decide to end up wanting to design furniture. So it is a little broad, and it is very confusing, the difference in overlaps, and your career trajectory, I guess, is limited by the education that you decide to get and the path that you decide to go on. So there is a way to like start, and want to be an interior designer, and then a path to becoming an architect, and vice versa. But to be like very narrow, the decorator is usually known for furniture and decor and styling. A designer is usually known for mainly interiors, and an architect is usually known for exteriors. Next slide. So just to like reiterate that again, an interior designer kind of source the finishes. They would help specify exact the type of products that you might use in a building. They would work on the layouts of the building. They would help select the bespoke furniture. They might create a lighting layout. They'd project manage, and they can offer a styling service to make sure that the whole look is what they intended from the beginning. And it's a little bit less of schooling, and then 1 exam instead of 6. So interior architect, I suppose the main difference since there's so much overlap, is that an architect thinks about things a little bit more structurally. And because they have that training, you can kind of do things more like the left-hand side, where you're creating a very custom staircase or things that actually deal with structure in the interior. And so that's kind of the main difference of an interior architect versus an interior designer. The schooling is the same. If there is a firm that you're working for later, and there are interior designers, the interior architect might deal specifically with the structure and the codes and the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing part of the project. So some things that interior designers and interior architects do, especially interior architects in the first few years of getting out of college, is you would make a mood board and a material board. And this would help communicate the room and the feeling that you are trying to create for your client. So you can make one of these at home. If you don't have Photoshop, you can do magazine clippings. You can go on to Houzz. I think they offer a free one. Pinterest definitely offers a free one. And there's also another app called Morpholio that isn't that expensive. And it's like a fun way to put together a bunch of like different furniture pieces and lighting, and kind of get like a mood going for what your intention is for that room. So it's a fun project if you want to decide to do it for your dorm room in college, or even your room right now. And I think that's all for me. So interior architecture and designers are mainly dealing with the inside of this floor plan. So you wouldn't be manipulating the exterior at all, especially if you're not a licensed architect. And then on the interior architecture designer side, this is kind of like the both. You could be working in a 3D space and kind of developing that mood board even further, where you're making notations of the furniture that you are going to specify, the materials that are going on the walls, the floors, the ceilings, and creating that entire space inside of a space. This is furniture selection. Again, more on the designer side. They would select the furniture and then label where it goes in the floor plan. And that's all. Thanks.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason, and I am a structural design engineer. Like many of you, I was also an alumni of the ACE program when I was a high schooler. And today I would like to tell you more about what I do in structural engineering and why is it an exciting field to work with for your future. So first of all, before I jump into what structural engineers do in daily basis, I want to let you know that if you ever played Jenga before, you may have already got some great instinct in structural engineering. One of the main tricks of Jenga is locating the loose pieces, which are the ones that are easier to remove without disturbing the integrity of the tower. So if a piece is loose, then you know what piece of block is not load-bearing. So similarly, for us as structural engineers, when designing a building, our job is to identify the load path from the top of the building to the foundation. So each level of the structure needs to be supported to the forces applied downward from the levels above. So in Jenga, wooden blocks,
Sorry about that.
yeah. In Jenga, wooden blocks are used as our material for creating a tower. In real world, we use various construction materials in design to have a building structure stands. Therefore, you may already have some good senses in the field of structural engineering. All right, next slide, please. What is structural engineering? So as structural engineers, we design and construct buildings and structures that are safe and capable of withstanding the elements to which they will be exposed. For example, the image on the left is a sculpture in front of the Viking Stadium in Minneapolis. Our job as structural engineers is to provide a backbone and system such that the sculpture will not fail or collapse when loading applies. As structural engineers, we also use our knowledge and assist architects to make building framework to be more efficient and be more cost effective. Next slide, please. What do we produce at work? So our primary work is to create presentable engineering drawings that include sets of plans and details for how a building or other structures will be built. The drawings is a guide for contractors to follow in detailing, fabricating, and installing parts of the structure. To back up our drawings, we'll provide supporting calculations and sometimes creating structural modeling to help understand the behavior of the structure. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of stakeholders in the building design project, and often us as structural engineers are a team player to keep the wheel moving. Communication and coordination are key for us to succeed in our job, as we're not necessarily just be sitting in our office and doing calculations all day long. A lot of the time, we would need to reach out to the architects, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing engineers to acquire for additional information as needed. We will also work with the BIM modelers to communicate and translate our ideas onto drawings so that to make it presentable. Next slide, please. So why structural engineering? So this can be unique for everyone, but personally, I am passionate into structural engineering because I feel proud to be able to see my work to stay on for quite a bit of time. I would always imagine that the work I'm going to do right now is going to stay when I become 80 years old, and I wouldn't be happier to be able to relate all these good memories when I revisit those buildings in the future. And the other reason I like structural engineering is that this is a profession to try to put ideas become the reality as we try to make a kind of structure to stand safely for people to live. Therefore, it's a really meaningful job and profession to consider for life. Thank you. So this is all. The next topic will be about digital design and coordination.
Thanks, Jason. My name is Brendan Mullins. I am an architect with Stantec Architecture. I'm going to be presenting alongside my colleague Yao, and I also am a former ACE student, so I was happy to hear that from Jason. We are going to be talking about BIM, and it's a big topic and a big word, but really what it is how we use 3D models in architecture. Making 3D models is extremely important to building projects, especially large ones that have a lot of moving parts and a lot of different types of designers, as we've heard about. So why do we make 3D models? We make them to coordinate the design. We make them so we can visualize the design like you see on the screen. We use it to figure out what it might cost, and it can even be used to fabricate parts and pieces of it. The project on the screen is the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, a project next to the USC Coliseum that Yao and myself are working on. And as you can see, this is a complex shape and a complex project, and it's very difficult to explain something like this on paper. A 3D model or an image like this is a much quicker way to convey an idea. I'm going to turn it over to Yao.
Hey, sorry, I was on mute. What is BIM? BIM is Building Information Modeling. What you see on the screen here is a assortment of hundreds of models from subcontractors. This is our live model from the contractor where they compiled all of the models into one. And the information part of this is that any one of these pieces contains information about it. So for instance, if you click on a chair, the chair will tell you what its main model is from, Herman Miller, and how much it will cost, how many chairs are within the building. So we provide them a design model. Contractors will build the as-built model. And if you go to the next slide, the reasons for doing this is then we can do clash detection, issues that we cannot have seen in a conventional 2D drawing, you can identify in a model. So these trusses are protruding out of the facade, and you would not have noticed that if you didn't have that built 3D environment. Other reasons for this is to resolve issues before it's built, so it's cheaper. You can also resolve issues with building permits with the city by showing them the 3D model that they might be confused in a 2D drawing. 3D model have gotten us permitting for the Lucas Museum by showing them to the city.
And one of the coolest things that we've been able to do with these models these days particularly is bring them into a video game environment. It might seem obvious to some of you, or maybe you didn't even realize it if you play video games, or maybe even look at different apps on your phone, you're interacting with 3D models all the time. The really cool thing is now with the click of a button, we can essentially take these design models we're using to make architecture and to make drawings, and we can send them into, kind of a video game environment where you can walk around. You can even put VR headsets on now and feel like you're in a building that's not built yet. On the left, you can see essentially an artistic version of the building. And on the right is actually that video game type environment. You can see how close they are to each other now. It's really amazing how good graphics are getting, where we're able to walk around in virtual reality inside of a project, and it really is getting very close to looking lifelike. So very exciting things. And you might be surprised to learn that this can be an entire career path within architecture, engineering, or construction. I kind of like this bottom graphic. You might start as somebody who's just working in BIM, making 3D models. You might then become a BIM manager. You could become the person who manages how the architects or designers or contractors use that model. And big corporations like we work for, Stantec, there are BIM departments where somebody might oversee how thousands of people use 3D models across the firm, and it can become your entire career. Some people might even leave this career to work in video games or movie or animation. So you might be surprised to learn that how 3D models are used can be an entire career and is a very important part of what we do in design. So thank you everybody for the fantastic presentations, and thank you to the students for listening to what we do every day. We are now going to do our activity. So I'm going to pull up some rules and make sure I explain this correctly. But essentially, what we're going to be doing is breaking into different rooms, and one of the mentors is going to become the drawer. They are going to have to draw something that the students are explaining to them. However, the students are not allowed to say exactly what it is, but particularly they're not allowed to use the taboo words. So when we break into these groups, the students are going to look at the instructions, but the person who's been deemed the artist is not going to. If you use a taboo word, we're going to use a trust system here. Just take note of it. It's going to dock you a point, and you're going to have, I believe, 15 minutes to explain this assignment to your artist and try to get them to draw it. So I believe I'm going to be relying on Anne to break us out. Again, whichever mentor becomes the artist, do not look at the instructions.